Okay, good afternoon. We're going to get started. I'm Safwan Masri. I'm Dean of Georgetown University in Qatar, and it really is my profound honor to welcome you to our conference on religion and the environment, moving from values to impact. We gather today to explore and recommend ways of mobilizing the vast but still relatively underdeveloped spiritual and moral resources present in the beliefs and values of religions and devotional creeds of the world. Building on Christian traditions, Pope Francis published in 2015 his encyclical letter Laudato Si, where he referred to the words of Saint Francis in the Canticle of the Creatures, giving praise to God through our sister, Mother Earth, who sustains and governs us, and who produces various fruit with colorful flowers and herbs. In the same spirit, leading Islamic scholars have recently released a milestone document, Al Mizan, a covenant of the earth, with their shared reflections on how Islamic thought has embraced ecological values and concerns. At COP28 this past fall in the United Arab Emirates, an interfaith statement was issued, stressing that it is our common and sacred duty to cherish not only our human family, but also the fragile ecosystem that cradles us. We owe it to this and future generations to make sure that the earth survives, that it is repaired and protected through research, education, and sustained concerted action against climate change and overexploitation of natural resources. Action based on rational thinking and practical solutions, and informed by our rich and diverse spiritual traditions and values. And that is why we embarked almost a year and a half ago on the Georgetown University Qatar Foundation initiative, the Global Environmental Challenge, Islamic and Christian Perspectives. Today's conference is the culmination of more than a year of important work that has centered on furthering research into the impact of lived religions on environmental issues, involving educational institutions in designing innovative ways of interreligious collaboration in the area of ecology, and advocating practical ways in which environmental policy can incorporate religious input. We started in earnest a year ago, and in November, we hosted participants in Doha for 3 days of workshops around these topics. This work is about providing practical tools and resources that can be used in activating diverse faith communities around the world, whose potential for spiritual leadership represents significant yet virtually untapped resources in the global effort to advance the ecological agenda. The work of the group has resulted in critical outcomes, much of it still under development. This includes the creation of an interactive online database of existing case studies of actions and interventions by faith communities on topics related to environmental sustainability. This database will serve as a resource for educators, researchers, and activists. It also includes preparation of a Laudato Si Institute resource book on the care and balance of our common home, Christian-Muslim dialogues, to be made available as part of an interactive website. The work that we are going to be discussing today would not have been possible without the close partnership between Qatar Foundation and Georgetown University, particularly the Berkley School for Religion, Peace and World Affairs, Georgetown University in Qatar, and the Earth Commons, Georgetown University's Institute for Environment and Sustainability. I want to acknowledge Her Excellency Sheikha Hind bin Hamad Al Thani, Vice Chairperson and CEO of Qatar Foundation, for her profound and inspired leadership and for her commitment to interfaith research, dialogue, and practical outcomes. But I also want to thank Dr. Tom Banshoff, Director of the Berkley Center for Religion, Peace and World Affairs, VP for Global Engagement at Georgetown University for his overall leadership of this initiative. Dr. Pete Mara, Dean of the Earth Commons Institute, for the Institute's co-sponsorship of this event and for his sustained engagement with GUQ. Dr. Munjad Murad, Assistant Professor of World Religions and Intercultural Studies and Director of the Eco-Justice Program at United Theological Seminary of the Twin Cities. Munjad serves as research and academic lead for this initiative. You'll get to meet many of the participants in this initiative over the course of the afternoon. There are too many for me to thank here, but I will thank them collectively for the incredible work that they have been putting into this initiative. So the initiative really demonstrates the critical and impactful role that Georgetown and Qatar Foundation can have when faculty expertise are brought to bear on the issues at hand from our DC and Doha campuses, and when experts within Qatar Foundation and the broader Qatari ecosystem are engaged, and when Global South and Global North networks are leveraged. The group that has been working on this is incredibly diverse in terms of the institutions that are represented, in terms of the disciplinary angles that they bring to the issues that we have been discussing. And in terms of the geography, we have participants from Indonesia and Malaysia and Bahrain and Qatar and the United Kingdom and many universities here in the United States. And this afternoon, we will learn from these leading experts, academics, most of them, but not all of them, religious leaders, activists with specialist and practical knowledge of different dimensions of the topics we are discussing. So our first panel will consider religious impact on environmental outcomes evident so far, articulating obstacles, looking for opportunities, suggesting possible ways forward in forging cooperation between spiritual and political forces, and mobilizing them for greater impact on ecological agendas. The panel will be moderated by Catherine Marshall, a senior fellow at Georgetown University's Berkley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs. Dr. Marshall helped to create and now serves as the executive director of the World Faiths Development Dialogue, an NGO that works to enhance bridges between different sectors and institutions. The second panel will discuss the key points of Al-Mizan, the landmark Islamic declaration on the environment, examining its connections with Laudato Si, and suggesting its potential contributions to future ecological interfaith initiatives. That panel will be moderated by Dr. Thomas Banshoff after the coffee break. So thank you so much for being here today. Thank you to all who have contributed to getting us to this point. Thank you, Tom, for being our leader throughout this initiative, and I invite Dr. Catherine Marshall to the stage. Before you start, Catherine, actually, I just realized I missed the last couple of lines, but go ahead. I'll be very quick, okay?
Okay, I'll sit here.
You know, I worked hard to find these quotes, so I don't want to go without using them. In his documentary, Life on Earth, Sir David Attenborough cautioned that in our hands now lies not only our own future, but that of all other living creatures with whom we share the earth. But I want to end with another set of remarkable words. These are attributed to Chief Seattle, leader of the Suquamish and Duwamish Native American tribes, after whom the city of Seattle was named. He said, "The earth does not belong to us, we belong to the earth." So I hope that we are mindful of this profound ancient wisdom as we commence our discussions. Now I've ended. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you very much for that introduction that I think set us on the way with inspiration, poetry, and spirituality. So we are focusing in this first panel, as we heard, on values and impact with the fundamental premise, belief, hope, that the religious voice, together and in all their diversity, have major impact already, but an even greater untapped potential for helping us to respond to the crisis that we face. So we have a wonderful panel that includes people ranging from very specific action to very global perspectives. And so in a sense, we're going to move not from values to impact, but from impact to values and to the broader questions that we're addressing today. So very briefly, the long biographies of each of the panel members are available online, but just to introduce them very briefly, Fakhruddin Manyanjaya from Indonesia is a scholar, but also very much an activist. He's very much involved in the Interfaith Rainforest Initiative, which I'm sure we'll hear a bit about, but also a very bold program of eco-pesantrens, which is essentially dealing with a very large part of the school system across Indonesia. So he's published many books, and he also has worked on many aspects of these challenges across different sectors. Laura Vargas was born in the Peruvian Andes, and I suspect that we will hear from her the direct personal witness of the destruction that she grew up seeing. She has worked in many different sectors. She's worked for the Catholic Bishops' Conference. She was a nun, no longer. She works with the Interfaith Rainforest Initiative. She's very much part of Religions for Peace, a major interfaith organization. So Laura is, I think we can see already, a force of nature, as everyone here, and will be situating us between what I suspect will be a call to action, but also what it really looks like on the ground. Willis Jenkins is a scholar, but a scholar who has a very long transdisciplinary focus. He's at the University of Virginia, set up a number of programs, very widely published with many different instruments in his toolkit, shall we say. And he will help to situate us both in the broader question of the scholarship around religion and ecology, and how he sees that as a major force as we look forward. And Ambassador David Saperstein has so many hats, it's very difficult to know which one to start with. He has over 40 years working with the Religious Action
Center,
which is a major institution that represents Judaism, but has also been very deeply involved in civil rights issues and environment issues, pretty much any social justice issue you can think of. David served as the ambassador for religious freedom in the second Obama administration. And he is a lawyer who has also taught at Georgetown, among other places. And he serves on many boards, including, I'm very glad to say, he's the chair of the World Faiths Development Dialogue trustee body, but also he has worked on human trafficking issues, but also on a number of environment issues. So somebody who sees the world from many different angles. I think you were also named the most influential rabbi in the United States at one point.
It was actually in an interview with my mother.
But somebody else too, I think. So let's start with Fakhruddin. Take us to Indonesia, which is, of course, one of the countries which is barely responsible for emissions, but which is suffering a lot of the consequences, whether it's in temperature, loss of forests, and how do you see the situation from Indonesia?
Thank you very much, Catherine. Happy to be here after 20 hours flight from Jakarta this morning up at the Dallas Washington DC. This is the third time I'm coming to Washington DC. I was born in Borneo 50 years ago, and I'm a witness of the cutting of the trees. When I see at the riverbank where there are logs being planted up to the bay of the area, which is the Nippon Maru and also Panama flags ship coming in 80s, in 1980s, in 1990s. So the wood was plowed like maybe every days and every week, like 3 or 4 field football, the big logs being plowed from Kalimantan. So that happened up to 1989, 1990, and then that's the first of I'm understanding, because I was also born in Kalimantan. I'm acquaintance. I like to tell story because this is an experience during I was kids. I a witness of researchers of orangutan, Professor Biruta Galdikas. She write a dissertation regarding orangutan, and he was very impressed with the orangutan at the area. It's very close to the river banks, and where a Muslim are not touching orangutan and other primates. And she was writing in her dissertation why? Because of the Muslim was taboo to hunting the orangutan. So I learned that this is not only a Muslim, but the root of that is, interestingly, I learned about the teaching. It was coming from the fiqh, the Islamic jurisprudence of Islam, which I learned that it influenced the living respect to the community of the earth, such as not consuming certain animal that being prohibited by the fiqh, by the scholars. I learned after going to university that's make an impact. At least there are 3 orders. If you learn biology, amphibia, reptilia, and primates are not being hunted by Muslim because they are not allowed to eat. And some of that, about 1,000, following of that, about 6,000 of species can be secure from the hunting, and causes extinction if they using the Islamic teachings. By that, I'm concerned regarding the importance of the authorities, because I'm learning in biology by training. The authorities is important to teach the Muslim world, Muslim communities, to follow their faith, not only related to the ecosystem balance, but it's because of their faith. Secondly, related to situation in Indonesia, of course, Indonesia is the largest Muslim population in the world, and by that we trying to remind that the teaching remind also Muslim is might be a causes because of majority, and we understand that it is not easy for us as a nation with the complexity to establish economy, and we have to run with the economy and challenging with the development. With the situation, with the complexity of which one will be the first, economic or the balance of the nature. Sometimes it is also intricated by the nation outsider investment, and every step we have to choose. But as an activist, we realize there are 4 factors we can influence for this the behavior changings of the environment. One is education. Second is religion, can be a change. The third is law. Law can make law enforcement. For example, the cutting the trees, the logging. If they are controlling it so sufficient, law enforcement can be matter. The fourth is market. The market demand is very important. They will not cutting the trees if there are no market. For example, there are no market for carbon trade in America. There will be no cutting trees. So that 4 component is very important for us to work with. So by the way, I as an academy thinking a long term, we working with education, which is must be long term, and also it's very important to think about the impact in the future. That is why the Eco Pesantren, if you can happen, you can type ecopesantren.com by eco with Indonesian style, using K, not C, not C, ecopesantren.com. Because I consult the clerics that because of my dissertation regarding Eco Pesantren, so I'm doing research on that. Why Eco Pesantren is very important? Because they are leadership, and the leader of Muslim in the future is coming from that Islamic boarding school, and we hope that they can take leads on the bringing the mainstreaming from the faith, from Islamic perspective for the environment. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I think you've highlighted some of the most critical issues that we're going to deal with, including trade-offs and choices and authority. I think we got a picture of the impact of logs being floated, but also the smoke and the fog that comes from fires, but also the real tensions between the welfare, human welfare of people in Indonesia, and some of the difficult choices that they face, whether they like it or not. So thank you. Laura, you come from a different part of the world, but maybe some of the parallel issues. There are also areas with large rainforests, and many of those difficult choices as well. So how do you see where we have to go?
Well, first of all, thank you so much. You know, my first idea when I entered this room was Harry Potter and the library of powers. No? That's it. Thank you so much, because it's a very nice experience. I was born in the Andes, and since I was very small, I have seen how mining, not illegal mining, just the legal one, destroyed the environment. No? I have seen how the rivers were contaminated, how we have less and less forests around, and that was a pity, really something that really touched us. But later on, before the year 2000, when we were invited as Catholics to celebrate the big jubilee of the year 2000, we thought this was a wonderful idea, to having a jubilee. Because the jubilee put us with this very important issue of we have to face what are we doing? What have we done with what the Lord asks of us? And we discovered that we have destroyed the land, that we have prisons that are totally against what human beings should be in, no? And that we have to respond to the care of nature as part of the care of human beings. Then this idea of care, no, has been something that really touched me since many, many years. We don't have the power, even we have in our hearts a power of destruction as human beings, no? We have also a power of care. And for me, this is the time to empower the power of care. Because for many thousands of years, we have put the power of destruction, no, the power of dominion over everybody, everything else. No? All the conquests of the cities during history, they were done by this idea: we are the most power, and we have to impose our power and our dominion on the other. Nobody cares about the other, but they destroy it, and they want to subject. I don't know how to say that in English, but dominar. We have to domain, no, the other.
To dominate.
To dominate the other. But I think we have come to a point in our own history that we have to stop that. As I said before in our little meeting, this is the time to change. And I think that a word that should be used more and more is change. We have to change lifestyles. We have to change the way we product things. We have to change the way we relate to nature. Because we cannot relate to nature as if we were the owners of nature. We're not. We depend on nature. We were created at the end, according to the biblical book, not because we were the most powerful or the most intelligent, because we were the most dependable of the rest. Animals, as soon as they are born, they can walk, and they go to look for their meal. Not us. We depend on somebody to care for us. And then this idea that we are not the most powerful, we're the most dependent on nature, is, I think, a very powerful idea that we have to use more and more. Because the other thought, the other idea of that we have the power to dominate over the others has brought us to this moment. And I think this is a moment to change. No, for me, this is the time to change. Change should be, as Paulo Freire, the very important Brazilian educator, used to say many years ago, we need to find the word, la palabra generadora, the word that generates, no, the change, no? So that I was many years involved in teaching to illiterate women. And we had to find this word that really make a change for them to start the whole process of education. No? Then I think it's time for us to find what's the word, no, that can generate changes, because we cannot continue the same. This is the time for change at every level. Thank you.
So I think we have a very clear message. It's the time for change, and it's a time for change because of what Laura has seen, the destruction. What she knows is the projection looking forward, but also the basic important values that her faith and that of others teaches. So let's turn now to Willis Jenkins, who will, I think you can help us to see how these challenges that we're hearing very much from Indonesia and Peru, but other countries as well, how that is reflected in what we know, the scholarship, and some of the unanswered questions perhaps, and where that takes us.
Yeah, sure. I just want to say, first of all, wow, it's such a pleasure to be in conversation with you both. I appreciate what you do. And I want to think about the work that you've brought here in relationship to one of the questions that convened this panel. So the question that our organizers convened us under was, why have religious communities so far had limited impact on environmental outcomes at the national and international level? And it seems, well, it's clearly it's not because of the absence of creative, committed, and engaged work of people like Laura and Fakhruddin and so many others through every community and tradition around the world. So why? Well, I just want to share three really overgeneral ways that scholars of religion and ecology have thought about that question. One is, well, these problems, these challenges are unprecedented. So we are facing Anthropocene challenges with Holocene religions. Human-caused mass extinction was perhaps unanticipated by any perennial moral tradition. That humans could impact how the atmosphere functions to regulate thermal energy, unanticipated by our scriptures, that humans would be reorganizing the oceans, so on, right? That it's just difficult to think about how our received canons, or let me put it this way, our received canons of ethics and law were not well prepared for interacting with neighbors through nonlinear carbon cycles and harms that unfold in aggregate ways over generations. That's just a complicated kind of moral problem. So so one answer is the traditions are they're non-competent to new, overwhelming, difficult things. Maybe have been able to be anthropocentric without there being big planetary consequences for that. And so it's just an overwhelming challenge. The second answer is no, not really. It's actually just a moral failure. That the problems that we faced are the outcome of perennial temptations to not follow existing teachings or to not apply them to new circumstances. And I think as the major teachings of Laudato Si and Al-Mazan have well articulated, religious adherents may simply not be applying their values as consistently as they could be in new situations. So, the perennial human liabilities to perpetuate injustice, or to go in for greed and warmongering, those are perennial failures that treat the living world with extractive hostility, lead to disrespecting neighbors, violence toward the vulnerable. In other words, look, climate change is not so terribly overwhelming and unprecedented. The US especially is simply using the sky as a waste dump with disregard for the vulnerable. It's not that hard. So are China and to some extent India and many others, right? Like it's just a perennial moral failure. So that's the second answer. And then the third would be distortion by unjust politics and paradigms. In other words, moral failure is encouraged by dominant powers. We are beginning to understand the extent to which fossil fuel interests have invested explicitly in moral failure in the United States, attempting to prevent a cultural value shift away from them. And to prevent an erosion of the huge state subsidies that fossil fuels enjoy around the world. That includes resources that have been specifically devoted to shape religious perceptions. So in the United States, fossil fuel interests have invested in the shape that U.S. evangelicalism will take with, some effectiveness. So that suggests that one answer to the question is not the negative, that religion is having national and international impacts, just not in the directions that are good for justice and resilience. So, unprecedented challenges, perennial moral failures, distortions of unjust powers. Which of the three explains? I don't know. I will just note that Laudato Si and Al-Mazan both seem to attribute to all three. They suggest that all three of those causes are, they explain some reason why there's not international impact yet. And so that suggests that work towards impact, so from values towards impact, sort of has to happen at all three levels simultaneously. That suggests the beginning of maybe a different kind of answer, which is that religion might be having an impact, or at least the kind of religion of the kind that is attempting to embody responsibility for all the relations in which we are actually participating. It just happens in a kind of slower, deeper, more upstream way. And in that case, then the question is how to support that work and facilitate its intersections with arenas of impact.
Thank you. And just so that you're aware of how we're running this, we're going to have a couple of rounds of discussion and then open it up. Hopefully we'll have some time to hear questions from all of you. So I think you've set the moral challenges very clearly, given us some hints at least on this basic question of, first of all, why has there not been a greater impact when there has been so much mobilization of religious communities, and what might be the reasons behind that. So David, where do you see this?
I can't wait for the next round when he tells us what to do about all three.
Well, I was waiting. That's the next round for sure.
I thought that was your job.
What a delight to be here, always. And if nothing else, I'm just in awe of this room. Every time I'm invited to be in this room, it's something very special. It really is. I was asked to cover a lot of territory, and my colleagues would have done it by being more disciplined. Being a nice Jewish boy from Brooklyn, I'll just talk twice as fast here. So let me take a run at this. First, 1 minute on the Jewish tradition, since it's not in the center of this conversation, but it's such a powerful tradition also, matching that of Islam and Christianity. From the moment of creation, we were taught not only we're created in the image of the divine, but that we are commanded to till and to tend God's creation. We're commanded to be Shomrei Adamah, guardians of creation. We're warned in the Bible that the earth is the eternal's and the fullness thereof, not ours. And one important thread of Jewish environmental thought argues that what that means is what we own in a trust relationship with God. And the terms of that trust, like any trust, are to protect the corpus of the trust. And then the moral obligation, not as a matter of caritas or philanthropy, as love of our fellow human beings, but a matter of tzedakah, of justice. We are commanded to share God's wealth with those of God's children who are less fortunate than we. It's not a choice, it's an obligation that all of us have corporately and all of us have individually. So from the earliest times, 3,000 years ago, the rules of lawfare said you can't cut down the fruit-bearing trees. You can't destroy things so much. Life can't renew itself afterwards. Sundance speaks across the centuries to what's happening in too many places in the world right at this moment. That idea of Bal Tashkek, do not waste, about the fruit-bearing trees, it's expanded over the centuries by the rabbis, who use it as a mandate to say you can't be wasteful about anything. There are all kinds of rules that are spelled out in great detail, in which there are regulations about the economy and the environment, how to protect the water, how to protect the land, how to protect the air, where you can put certain industries, how far they have to be from where people live, all kinds of rules and regulations about this. Much of this has to speak to us. And I would include the one maybe example of what you were talking about is hard to fathom in religious ethics, which is the story of Noah, that everything can be lost about it, and the concept of protecting endangered species. But that's a whole nother talk here. So now, what is the value added of religion to the debates that we have? The first and most obvious, here in the United States, there are over 300,000 houses of worship. It is the most common public building in America. Count up all the libraries, all the schools, all the hospitals, all the police stations in New York community that you've ever visited or lived in, and there are more houses of worship in that community than there are. Extrapolate that across the globe, globally, from what we know by the little data there is. We are talking about millions of houses of worship. And imagine if every one of them modeled for the communities and for their members what it meant to be a model of sustainable development, of sustainable life, of merging the values that you were talking about. And that was a very powerful presentation. I won't forget it. Thank you. Here. But if they were all modeling that and all advocating their governments, local, state, federal, to actually address these problems more comprehensively, what a different world it would be. Second are the values that we do bring to bear. And I simply want to mention two that I think are absolutely indispensable based on what my colleagues have just said. One is one of religion's greatest contributions to ethical thought in the world is the moral obligation we have to the generations yet to come. And the second, that is common to every one of our traditions, is that obligation to help the poor. So if you want to look at our contribution to the environmental crisis, those two propositions are absolutely indispensable and are descriptive of what we've already done. We're talking about case studies. You're talking locally, but I live in the world of policy. And when I think about the debates that we had when we were shaping climate change legislation, I want to acknowledge Walt Grazier, who worked for decades for the Catholic bishops, helping to guide their environmental work. Walt and I would meet where Henry Waxman, he's shaping legislation. He had nothing about remediation, nothing about accessibility to new technologies for the poor countries, nothing about the adaptability of what they have to new technologies and their ability to mitigate things. The countries that created the problem the least are the most affected by it, the least equipped to deal with it. The religious communities at the COP meetings internationally, here in our country and in many countries, help put those issues on the globe. The Jubilee campaign that was kind of coextensive with the early legislation dealing with the debt crisis as well was a powerful religious voice that helped shape what these debates are all about. So we really do have, I think, value added that we already have had an impact and still have the ability to make an even greater impact the more effectively we can work together. We also, we don't have time to deal with this, but if you think about the billions of dollars in our pension funds at a time that people are thinking very strategically about what divestment and use of invested monies can mean, fossil fuel divestment, there are very powerful social values and physical values that the religious community brings to bear. So what are the obstacles? You summed up, I think, the core ones. Let me just add three others that make it complicated for us. One, the religious communities of America are the quintessential multi-issue entities, right? And anyone who's worked in politics will tell you a single-issue group is almost always, on any given issue, on that issue, going to be more effective than a multi-issue group. Because any senator, congressperson says to me, David, here, this is great. You came to me about particulate matter in the EPA things, and you guys wrote them about it, and you want me to back this up and pressure the EPA on it. Here, I don't particularly agree on that. Here, but I'm good on anti-Semitism. Here, I mean, you know, we have opinions on everything. The religious groups are absolutely convinced they can speak authoritatively on any domestic and foreign policy issues. And so we're spread thin across a whole wide range of issues. When we all work together, here, and we focus our efforts, and we're willing to put resources because of a period of time. There's an urgency, and God knows there's an urgency about this. We can make a real difference here. That's one thing. Secondly, unlike most NGOs where people join for a purpose, people join our churches, our mosques, our synagogues, our temples, our ashrams for many different reasons. And there's not going to be consensus of views on issues. And we have to be respectful of that, but not crippled by it. And each of us has our own way of doing it, but it is another obstacle that we have to come to grips with here. And relatedly, third, there are theological differences. At the lunch today, someone made reference to those who believe, hey, God's perfectly capable of solving this problem. This is clearly God's plan here. And those of us who believe that our God-given wisdom was aimed at, I'll just conclude with this. There is a strand of Jewish theology that argues that when God created the world, God left one part of creation undone, the creation of a world of justice and peace. And then God gave to humanity that given to nothing else in creation that we know of yet. The difference, to understand the difference between right and wrong, good and evil, the blessing and the curse, and the ability to choose between them. And then God entrusted in our sacred text a blueprint to how to create that world of justice and peace. In doing so, God ennobled humanity, raised us above mere biological existence, and gave to our lives meaning and destiny and purpose. The failure to do it is our failure. What a wonderful thing to be called by God to be partners in creating that world of justice and peace. And that world of justice and peace starts with protecting God's creation for every one of God's children today and tomorrow.
I think we have heard a remarkable set of calls, both to action, but also some wisdom on some of the obstacles that stand in the way. I think one of the points that David highlighted that is very much on my mind is that the wealthy societies of the world historically, but also today, are responsible for a very large part of the problem. And there are many parts of the world that have not yet benefited from the gifts of modernity, the gifts that have expanded and extended lifestyles, created the possibilities to live prosperous lives. How in Indonesia, Fakhruddin, do you raised this question of the fact, first of all, Indonesia is not going to stop development because of so it's not going to happen. But it's also a moral issue that should not be the choice. So how do you see those debates, for example, within religious communities and with the students in the Pesantren? Is that an undercurrent or is that a major issue?
Thank you. That's a breathful question for me. I'm working with Pesantren, which is they are in the boarding school. They have very limited resources to discuss regarding the environment. However, there are issues now in a national level that the religious community is being political support because of their vote. Like Nahdlatul Ulama, for example, and Muhammadiyah is now being agree with the new concessions. There's a big issue in the countries. They will be giving for concession for the mining, and nevertheless, the wood will be disappeared. I think there's been a debate regarding that on the activism and whether they are capable to do that, but it's still in the conversation. Well, we are in the state of discussing regarding that, and it's remembered me to, if we're thinking with the global values and the condition right now, it remembered me to the hadith that the Prophet Muhammad once says that in our business of the avoiding the degradation, we are going like in a ship together, and in the ship there are two decks. I wrote this narrative in my books, The Last Generation. There are ship and the two decks. One deck is the rich. The others in the unders is poor people. One day, the poor people in the lower decks thirsty because they need water. You can imagine if they knock to the up decks and they need water, and the decks up there not giving any water for them. What will be happen to the boat? They will dig the boat, and we will be sinking together. This kind of narrative is remembering me with the wealthy countries and the poor countries. I've been day to days up to my end of semester, going to the forest and see really happen to Indonesian, which is cutting the trees because they need food, and they have no idea where to go. They hunting the animal because they have market on it. They cutting the trees, and by cutting the trees, it mean that emission will be released, and whatever we import to stop them, if the other we cannot go together between poor countries and developing countries. That's why it's remember me, we have to work together in all the way we can go to work together with hand in hand with religious leaders, activists, environmentalists, governments, and rich country and poor countries should go together to save this, our planet, the only one boat we have. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that the moral issue, are you trying to say you want to jump in?
I wanted to just ask a question. I didn't quite follow. Muhammadiyah and you have taken what position on environmental issues there on the mining?
They have values member, and as political commitment, I think Muhammadiyah and NU have been engaged with the new government, and they will agree to accept concession for the mining.
I see.
So
I see.
it's still in the discourses and the national dialogues. You can see in Indonesia now, which is something my peerness as well.
I think one of the big gaps is more conversation between these moral issues and the religious communities with the development community and the environment committee, because some communities, sometimes they have very different language approaches of what growth means, among other things.
I like you getting the plug for WFDD in there. Thanks.
How did you guess? But Laura, if we could focus a little bit on the remarkable program that you have been involved with, the Interfaith Rainforest Initiative. But I think it raises two questions that we haven't touched on that are important. One of them is the role of indigenous communities and the indigenous wisdom. And because just by history, what's left in many of the most remote areas, including rainforests, are some of these very original, but how do religious communities deal with this in practice? I could also ask Fakhruddin this, but let's focus on the Amazon. But the second question, I think we cannot have a discussion of a major policy issue without thinking about gender and women's roles. So I know we've discussed this, so maybe you could give us at least some hints as to how you would think we should approach those issues.
I think that it's well known that the places that are best kept in the Amazon region are the places where indigenous groups live. No? Because they have a relation established with nature. They depend on nature, but not for profit. They depend on nature just to live. Then, if they need to cut trees, they are going to cut what they need. They are not going to cut thousands of trees. They are going to cut exactly what they need to build their houses, no? Because it's a need. And I remember once talking to a bishop that had lived almost all his life, even he's Croatian. He arrived to Peru when he was 17, and he's almost 75, and he has lived all his life in Peru. No? He's more Peruvian than Croatian. And I was asking him if during all this time that he has spent with different indigenous communities, he has seen some kind of spiritual relation of the indigenous communities with the forest. And he mentioned something that really made me think a lot, no? He said that he knows, because he has seen it several times, that when the Achanicas, that's the biggest group of indigenous communities in Peru, they go out for hunting, before they start in their way, they kneel down and they ask the spirit of the animals they are going to hunt for. They are asking for pardon, they are asking for forgiveness, because they know they are going to destroy the life of those animals, but they need that to eat. And I think this is very powerful, because when we enter the jungle to cut the trees or to cut animals to sell them or whatever, the only idea in mind is how much I'm going to gain. It's the money. Because money is just what decides our relations. It's not how we relate to nature. And for me, that's the main thing. We don't know how to relate to nature in a basic of care. And I think that care is such a powerful and important experience, the importance of care. And as you know, Margaret Mead, who's a very famous anthropologist, no? And she was asked after one of her conferences by somebody in the audience, where was the starting point where we can assure that humanity starts? And she think for a while, and she said, when we find a femur that was broken, but was sanado, was
Healed.
was healed, no? And then she explained, and she said, in those days, if you were part of the group, just going from one place to the other for food or for water or for whatever you need, and you fall and you break your femur, well, the group was going to continue because they had to continue. Nobody was going to stop and care for you. But when you find that a femur was broken and healed, that means that somebody stopped, took good care of you, and that femur was healed. And for me, this is one of the most powerful thoughts that I have ever read in, well, the last years. Yes, to care for the other. That other could be nature. That other could be an animal. That other can be a human being. But to care for the other is essential so that we continue living as human beings. If we don't care for the other, whoever that other is, then I don't think how we can manage 100 years from now. We have to start thinking. This is the challenge, how to care for the other. Mm-hmm. And it's a very powerful challenge. And that can really make people change. I can see talking to small groups, but simple groups, people from poor parishes, and talking about things like this, or for example, to make them aware that all the water in Peru doesn't come from the coast. We have a cold current. We don't have enough nubes,
Clouds.
No.
clouds, so that they can be converted into rain. No, we don't. But what the water in Peru comes from the Amazon, and people can't believe it. So far away, yes, so far away, but it's as close as the house that you open in your
The
house.
faucet.
That you open in your house. It's so close to you. Then when people realize that, it's like a big discovery. We depend on the Amazon region. We depend on the forest. We can't destroy that. It's destroying the possibilities of having water in our houses. No? And then I think this is the time to make people aware, no, of how we are interrelated. And this concept of interrelation is amazing. No? It can help you change your mind. How we are interrelated, even we're so far apart or far away. No? When we realize that the sun of the Sahara goes by the clouds to the Amazon, I said, how come? Just it's due to the Elysius, ¿cómo se llaman los? The Elysius is the winds that come from the Sahara, no? And they get to the Amazon, no? And we have the sun of the Sahara there, no? And then you realize we are so little things, no? We have to really understand the whole movement, how everything is interrelated with the other. And this is a real discovery to really make life different. Thank you.
So Willis, you left us with some formidable obstacles, and I'm sure you have some solutions. I don't know if you want to pick up either of these themes that Laura started and then went into care, but the sort of the role of the indigenous, as well as the some of the gender dimensions, how those would be defined. But you may want to stick to the solutions to the problems you set out for us.
Well, just picking up on the last thing that Laura said, one thing that religious traditions have a facility for is being able to at once meditate on the incredible smallness of humans and the moral centrality or the incredible bigness of humans. And that is one Anthropocene challenge, right? On the one hand, you have to talk about how humans are making and remaking the planet, and at the same time remain very, very small in a broader cosmology. And I think if there's one thing I appreciate from the Almazan statement, which we'll hear from in the second part, in which there are the drafters of which are here, it's that it has done just that. And if I can point to one specific thing in it that is the beginning, the beginnings of the kinds of solutions that might be able to get some sort of traction. I was impressed in the Al-Mazan document with the priority for the claims and even the rights of non-human nature. The rights of non-human nature, of course, is the often what indigenous representatives in global settings will advance, in part because that is one of the most effective ways of actually respecting the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and historic ancestral treaties. So at the same time, that's that's a little bit of a shift or a reorientation in what we've taken from the mainstream of Islamic law, something similar in Laudato Si, which comes right up to the edge of talking about rights for nature and then doesn't quite say it. So I think that is an interesting arena for ongoing interreligious dialogue and collaboration, including within an interreligious dialogue, the role of indigenous peoples with representatives of so-called world religions. I think that's a place of extraordinary intellectual and theological reflection as well as real policy teeth.
Good. Well, David, any further thoughts before we open it up to questions?
Yeah, we were chatting lunch, and I made the argument, when we're looking at, first, religion itself is at once, paradoxically, the most local way that people organize their lives. Mm-hmm. All those houses of worship I talked about, and the most global way that people organize their lives, right? I mean, it really is something extraordinary in that regard. So that puts us in a good position if you're talking about it requires things both small and global in order to address this as something that can be value added to this enterprise. I made the argument before that if you're really going to change something as massive as this, you have to first change people. Mm-hmm. And that has to do with the way we educate our children. I'm really honored to be part of a project in Indonesia in which a group of Jewish and Christian scholars are actually teaching madrasa teachers how to teach about other religions for the first time, something that hasn't happened before. And I use as an example, when I talked about the similarities that we have, our position on helping the poor and protecting God's creation, protecting the environment as a commonality all three of the traditions have in common here. So how we educate people from the very beginning, but also recognizing that religion has a distinctive ability to actually create transformations in people. And that's what's called for at this moment. It is to help people transform their understanding of their role in the world and the responsibility that that brings in a very demonstrable way. We have the capacity to contribute to that effort to do that. So changing people is one task that we have. Second is changing institutions. That includes capitalism and the way global capitalism functions. We have to be honest about that. It doesn't care as an institution what happens with the world and how we actually alter institutions, academic institutions and economic institutions and cultural institutions to begin to be partners rather than opposing forces to try and address this extraordinary crisis of such urgency is another task. And third is policy and government. Local, state, and federal. What kind of policies in our communities, our states, our regions, our nations are going to actually enhance our ability, or globally, to try to address this crisis. And we really have to address all three of those if we're to have an effective impact. And I think the religious community in each one of those has something of significant value added that it can bring to bear on the transformation that's needed.
Good. Well, I see there is a microphone. Who would like to go first with a question, a challenge? I'm sure people have comments as well. If I don't, okay.
Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon, everybody. We raised the issue a little bit earlier, and first I just have to be exceedingly grateful that we're gathering, particularly in an environment of peace. We can all sit here and be very relaxed, and climate change, and how are you, Rabbi?
You, brother.
David's like, I know him. But I wanted us to center also the question around the audience. Looks like most of the people from the global north. We're the ones who are killing the people in the global south. There is definitely some issues around race that need to be brought to the table. And the issue not only of the issue of diversity in terms of gender, which we raised, but also the issue of race. And that includes, if we want to touch it, even in the United States of America, I've discovered that black and brown people tend to live in the most contaminated areas. But also internationally, the issue around climate, there are so many conflicts that lead to war that are really a function not only of capitalism, but the exploitation of people around the issue of the environment, access to water, access to power, that's precipitating war on our planet. And so I know it's a lot, but I know that it's central to our survival. And I would argue that in the areas of Islamic law, that we have 5 durura, necessities in the concept of maqasid al-sharia. I think we are at a place now where the 6th necessity for human existence is not just the preservation of life, the preservation of honor, the preservation of lineage, of intellect, of wealth, of faith, but also the preservation of the environment as a principle in maqasid al-sharia. I'll leave it to you to respond.
Well, I'll leave it to someone to respond. I think what you're highlighting is a theme that has run through, I think, each one of the presentations here, which is the issues of fairness and justice, which are also, I think, very much part of the religious framework and teaching. Who would like to respond? Fakhruddin, do you want to start?
Yeah. Thank you very much for the question. Yes, I just want to respond to the recent issue regarding the maqasid sharia. It is necessary to have environment above even all that 5 maqasid sharia, because without better environment we cannot live. We cannot do nasal. We cannot do the rich, avoiding all the things that from maqasid can be achieved without the better environment. So this should be a must priority. For example, the climate change is now above all the 17 SDGs is climate change, everything. Who can work within the 50 degrees Celsius outside? You cannot do Hajj even in the 55 degrees outside, because 80% of the Hajj is outside. It's in the nature. So this is decision of Hajj. It should be reflect for the Muslim, particularly that we are in the nature. We are dependable to the better environment for our ritual. That's it. Thank you.
In the next panel, I assume we'll address this. Were you going to say something?
Well, just a quick word, since I've said Anthropocene a couple times. I mean, to your point about environmental justice and systemic racism, there's a way, obviously, in which talking about the human-made planet and the peril to humanity and what humanity has to do can allow the concept of humanity to just launder colonialism and white supremacy, so that like the referent of human is, of course, the global north, who now feel themselves to be maybe a little bit vulnerable. And so the whole planet must get together and do something that will keep those societies and their systems resilient. And that is, a terrible peril in talking about humanity and the planet, and something that I think, well, I appreciate the way that the organizers of this particular conversation have made it multi-centric and multivocal and prevented, a conversation at Georgetown from going in that direction. But I appreciate that very much.
Well, are there any other questions? If not, I'll see who wouldn't the, okay.
I just want to make a comment.
Just could you wait for the mic? It's right there.
But can anyone hear me? Because this, okay. Is this better? So I just want to make a comment. I was over in Doha in November for the panel. And I'm really grateful that what started in Doha, Qatar in November that had the discussion can travel and come to Washington, D.C. And Georgetown University and the Qatar Foundation has a partnership that's very unique and interesting. It's been going back many years. So I really just want to make a comment and just say, it's not a question. I'm really grateful that you all are having this conversation right now in Washington, D.C., because what started in Doha in November was really interesting, was very insightful, and I'm glad the West can get a broad sense of like what this is about. So not more of a question, just more of a comment as thank you and just being very humbled in your presence.
Great. We have Walter.
First, thanks for your comments, very, very helpful. Would anyone want to comment? I'm looking at the nexus between climate change, conflict, and refugee flows. And for me, I see that as just a huge issue that's coming. And so is there any comment on that in terms of I'm thinking the religious community is involved in all of that in terms of ethics, practical work on the ground, and that type of thing. But do you see that as some place we could, get out of the silos and move it together, even though I know we're spread thin in terms of so many issues, but is there some way of kind of organizing a piece of this, at least at the policy level? Thanks.
Do you want to take that, David?
I mean, there's such an intersectionality of these issues, Walt, as you know. You've dedicated your life to that intersectionality. But climate change drives huge numbers of displaced populations. And it's going to get worse, and it's going to affect everyone. Those displaced population exacerbates other range of problems, including strains on the environment, wherever they move in terms of that. I'm chairing right now a federal advisory group on human trafficking, and we know wherever there are displaced populations like this, terribly vulnerable to human trafficking. So we're dealing with a whole series of violations of human rights that led those people to be deprived of their homes and driven out of their homes or at the risk of their lives very often. Here are fleeing utter desperation, whether that's economic or physical desperation from violence that's taking place. And everything is connected with each other. But the one thing that's absolutely clear is if the global climate change crisis is not addressed and dealt with, it will multiply all of those geometrically. Here, what we have now is a taste of what we will be facing. So there's no way to separate almost any of those issues. They're an integrated whole about the crisis humanity faces at this time. But one of the foundational issues that has, in addition to racism, in addition to structural poverty, is the climate change crisis. It won't go away. It must be dealt with now if we have any hope of stabilizing something. And again, going from the macro to the micro, the one thing I will say is you asked about the relationship of gender. Educating young girls does more to stabilize communities, more to give us sustainable economic growth here than almost any other single factor that we can control in terms of the intersectional relationship of a lot of these things. So, if we can, like Nick Kristof once observed, here, the greatest weapon for defeating terrorism and extremism in the world is not drones shooting missiles down on them. It's educating young girls. It's why they're so terrified by it, as we see Malala Yousafzai and the girls in repeatedly incidents with young women in Nigeria and other places. So again, it's all together, but that as something that connects with every one of these aspects is one of the few things that we can work on together. And again, the religious communities play a huge role in terms of educational systems here and modeling the education of young women, and that is really a social good that we can bring to bear on this crisis.
Yeah, Laura, I know that there are so many refugees in Peru, and you've been working on those issues. I'm sure you have a comment on that.
I would like to talk about women, and especially having in mind an indigenous woman. She's from the Achanica group. She belonged to a small community, and her community was invaded by miners. No, and they were legal. They went there, and what they did was they paid the community some amount of money so that they can use the land and take out the gold, because there's too much gold in the Amazon rivers. That's a curse, not a blessing. And her community has 24 families. 23 agree, and they accept the money. But she said, no, my land is for my children. She has 6 children. The smallest one was around a year. And she was beaten. She suffered so much, and we've met her when she was just under all this pressure, and of course we support her. But what I want to say is that it's not only educate women, we have to support their fight, because women are the most important fighters in a community. If they took a cause, they are going to follow it to the end, no? Because they have this power of they are defending their children, and as they say, the life of the community. And we have to defend that. And her name is Jessica Diaz, and I admire her very much. She's very poor, but she's still there resistant, and she had a support. I don't know if it's enough, but at least she's recognized as a defender of the environment by the Ministry of Justice. And as they said, the indigenous leaders, what are we going to do with a paper when we have to face ballots? No? And that's their daily life. But at least it's very good that she has a paper that said she's an indigenous defender of the land, and she has the right to stay in her land. Thank you.
Thank you. We have precisely 3 minutes left. So if any of you, starting with David, has a final word or thought that you haven't been able to express, let's go down the line.
I had a story, but I don't have time if we have only 3 minutes left. I don't have anything to add at this point. It's been a rich conversation.
I think people want the story now. They've been tempted.
Yeah. Stories are just wonderful.
Right, so for me, the most puzzling word in the Bible comes at the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, where God sends these messengers, these angels, to rescue Lot and his family. And they describe Sodom and Gomorrah are going to be destroyed. Everything is going to be eviscerated. I'm going to bring you to the mountains of safety. Let's go. And the next word is Vayitmamem. And Lot lingered. And the rabbis over the centuries say, why in the world, knowing everything was going to be destroyed, they had to get to the mountains of security where they would be okay? Why did Lot linger? And the great medieval commentator Rashi says, Kedei latziel et mamino, he lingered because everything he owned would be left behind and lost to him, and the money that he would lose made him linger. And then Rabbi Ibn Ezra, the famous Rabbi Ben Ezra of the poem "Grow Old Along with Me, the Best Is Yet to Be," Ibn Ezra says, he was frightened, terrified, and he paralyzed, and he didn't have the strength to flee. That when we're frightened about something, we hear that it paralyzes us, and we accept answers that we might not otherwise. And then finally, Sforno, the great Italian commentator, says he was confused. What does this mean? It's going to be destroyed. What does it mean? I don't know what's in front of me. What's in those mountains of safety I'm going to? And because he was confused, he didn't know what to do, and he lingered. Where we see things that we know are going to be destroying everything we have, and our greed, our money, our uncertainty, our fear, our confusion about technicalities of the debates paralyze us, it leads to utter destruction. And the only difference between then and now, there are no angels who are going to take us to the mountains of safety. It'll be us holding hands and walking together.
Well, that was fantastic. Does anyone want to add anything to that? I think everyone
that's okay.
is humbled. So thank you all. This has been a very thought-provoking discussion, I think, with many stories, with many challenges, and with a range of very positive solutions. So thanks to all of you, and we look forward to the coffee break and then the next discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Katrina.